My name is Sean L. Krieger, and I'm the Acting Director and Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for the Virgin Islands State Historic Preservation Office. I'd like to thank you for joining us in this brief discussion on the importance of the Comprinsen's Garter archaeological site and what it means to us as Virgin Islanders and Americans. The Comprinsen's Garter site is a significant site to the Virgin Islands because it represents one of the few known sites within St. Thomas that documents the early history of our Taino, Arawak, and Carib settlers. These prehistoric peoples that they're often known represented a large segment of our early history before the Danes colonized these islands. Through the National Historic Preservation Act, we were able to ensure that this site was not only protected but properly investigated. And this investigation yielded a wealth of information about our early prehistoric settlers.
My name is David Brewer. I'm the Senior Archaeologist for the State Historic Preservation Office, Virgin Islands, and Department of Planning and Natural Resources. The very first people who came into the Caribbean were we call them archaic people or pre-ceramics. So they came in about 4000 BC. They were Stone Age people, and their tools were stones, nets, fish spines, bone, things that didn't last. So these people had a rough time of it. They settled mostly along the coast. They were eating a lot of fish. They ate a lot of land crabs. At one point, they were even referred to as the crab people. They were around for 1,000, 1,500 years, but then they were replaced by the early classic Taino. The Taino, we know, came out of South America. We also suspect that they were coming out of Central America at the same time and inhabiting the Greater Antilles, coming up the Lesser Antilles, the Windward Islands, and coming down from the Greater Antilles, Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico. Now, the early classic Saladoid, they're the ones who we're most concerned with. They had the most beautiful technology, ceramics. They brought the technology from South America, and many of the motifs on the pottery, the colors, the designs, are reflective of South America. But they were very good about the quality of their ceramics. The coloring was beautiful. They were very fine ceramics. And when I say fine, they were thin, yet they were tough, and they could hold it. The colors, generally red, whites, and designs, very intricate. Now, they came in about 2500 BC, and they lasted for 2,000 years. 2,000 years they were doing well, doing great. They settled all the larger islands, all the Greater Antilles. Now, the early classic Taino, whom we refer to as the Saladoid, the Taino were so successful, they occupied the islands, they overpopulated the thing. Now, that led to the Osteonoid. They thought that these were separate cultures, but we've come to learn that was not the case. The early classic Taino had just developed into the larger common classic Taino. Again, they lasted for 1,000 years. They were here when Columbus arrived, but 100 years before Columbus arrived, we had the Caribs, the Kalinago, and they came out of South America with a vengeance. They came up the Lesser Antilles, island by island, island hopping and conquering. Now, the Lesser Antilles, the Windward Islands, were not very well populated, so it wasn't that big of an operation to take over one island after another. But by the time they had reached St. Croix here in the Virgin Islands, it was 100 years before Columbus. In fact, we have evidence that on St. Croix, both Taino and Carib, Kalinago, existed at the same time. And they would raid each other's. You stay on your side of the island, we'll stay on our side of the island, but we might raid each other for wives or goods or just for fun. But as they were warring with each other, that's when Columbus shows up. And he found this enmity between them, and he exploited it, and he helped the Taino fight and actually help wipe out the Caribs. Caribs had taken all this technology, so the ceramics, they knew how to make ceramics, but they were warriors per se, as opposed to farmers, agriculturalists. The Taino were well known for being agriculturalists, sedentary, big villages, lots of people. The Caribs were small, family-oriented, fighters, fishermen, deadly fishermen. But that's what Columbus walked into and exploited to the detriment of both tribes. And everyone knows the story after that.
Hello, I am David Hayes. I was the principal investigator and lead archaeologist on the Main Street project in downtown Charlotte Amalie. We found this site when the street was resurfaced and the new water line was installed about 4 feet down. And so in January and February of 2014, we came down here with a crew of 12 professional archaeologists and a combination of people working for us and volunteers from a number of sources, and excavated the site over a period of 3 weeks, working 6 days a week. I was able to realize that we had hit an undiscovered major component of a site that had sort of been known from before, from previous work back in the 80s. This project was being dug with a big backhoe, and that backhoe was bringing up large, and I'm talking pieces up to like this big, of pottery, numerous shells, and other things. We realized that it is what we call a midden, what St. Thomians today call the Bavoni dump. It's literally the dump from a village that was somewhere in Charlotte Amalie 1,600 years ago. In a yard on a side, I was pulling out 200 whelk shells and a box of artifacts. We have some 85 cases of artifacts, and they date from around 400 AD, some 1,600 years ago. Of those 85 cases, we have a number of cases of ceramics. In front of me here are a few of the ceramics. This is a small fraction of one box of ceramics. We have found numerous bowls, beads, rock crystal, carnelian, and shell beads, figurines, huge pieces of coral used as graters, rock from all over the Caribbean, some of it traveling hundreds of miles to get to St. Thomas. We have shells, the local whelk shell. We have 3,000 of those that were found. The site is very, very important in St. Thomas's history because it is the first site found on St. Thomas that we have good dating to 400 AD and to these people who were here 1,600 years ago. It predates most of the other sites on St. Thomas that we have extensive material from. But this site is of a period we know very, very little about, and the ability of this site to tell us what these people ate, what they ate from, where they traded with, what they were able to find on the island and in the ocean to eat and live with and work with, and how they use the environment around them. A lot of their material shares characteristics with material from closely islands, Puerto Rico, Down Island, St. Croix. However, there is material here that shows trade much further around, possibly as far as Central America and South America. There is certainly stone that has come from other islands here. These people, while they were very local people and were living very much off the food and the environment they were in, they had contact with their fellow peoples in other places here. We see this out of the food we get. A lot of it is marine food. It's whelk shells, it's fish of all sorts of varieties, it's turtles. Land crabs are often found in this particular site. We have a dog. We're not sure that was food, but there is also in some of the ceramic cooking bowls, we have the remains of the cooked material that is going to be analyzed for the starches, the corn, as they called it, maize, the cassava, and the other material they were gaining from the land to complement the proteins they were getting out of the sea. This is what we're learning from this. The food is local. Some of the pottery is not. Some of the stone is not. Some of the pottery is very much a St. Thomian pottery. Some of it is a larger area extending several hundred miles through the Caribbean. Some of it comes from even further away than that. But very little comes from further away. These people traded around the Caribbean Sea for what they needed in life, whether it be for a necessity or for what we might consider a luxury today. When we're finished with the analysis, the goal is to have them on display because the artifacts are the property of the people of the Virgin Islands, and they tell a major part of the history of these islands. The skill these Saladoid people had at making pots and forming rock artifacts is incredible. We very much want the people of St. Thomas, not only the people who are resident there, but the tourists to be able to see this and learn something of the history of St. Thomas. What I have in my hand is two pieces of a stone axe. They're good size, they fit into your hand very well. To look at the edge on this thing, it's really quite an edge to have been put on a stone tool. And if that was in my hand and I was chopping with it, it'll take down a small bush, it'll certainly cut fish, it'll break any shell that I happen to need to break. This will kill small animals, will make me wood that I can make charcoal out of. This stone is traded throughout the Caribbean, and it's much finer than most of them found, and it's a very valuable stone. What we have here is a piece of Elkhorn Coral that was found down on Main Street in the dig. It has never been washed since we got it because it contains starch grains that were used when they were grinding things, and they would have a stone like this and would be grinding corn or maize, cassava or yucca, and anything else they wanted to grind down. But this is a grindstone of the kind that was being used here for grinding corn, maize, yucca, cassava, could be cotton to get the seeds out, or whatever they had growing. You know, sit there for hours grinding stuff, and you get a flour, and you can make tortillas and bread of the kind that was being used at that time. Okay, we have here a helmet shell, and it's a beautiful shell, but this one has been turned into a bowl. They carved out the entire insides of it, probably for ceremonial purposes, but it's a beautiful little helmet shell bowl. What we have here is an incredibly finely made three-tiered vessel that can be hung or maybe set down. Fortunately, we don't have the bottom of it, but this is a demonstration of the incredible skill at pottery making. The vessel itself is only a couple of millimeters thick, absolutely smooth. It is a truly spectacular piece of craftsmanship. Whatever it was used for, we'd love to know. This bowl, assembled out of many broken pieces there, is one incredible bowl. As you can see, it is almost a foot in diameter, and it has this incredible ring around the lip that is detailed within the thing with tiny little cross hatchings that are painted red. And then it's got the little nubbins that stick up on the side there, almost as though they're handles. This piece is got a lot of typical things with the other islands around here, the incising, the patterns, but it seems to be unique to the St. Thomas and particularly to the Main Street project. And in this, it may actually represent some form of their religious beliefs and their spiritual beliefs at the site 1,600 years ago. This is an incredible item. This item actually shut down all the archaeological work on the site when it came out of the ground. We have here a frog that has been carved out of the inside of a shell. These are very, very rare. They're very, very beautiful, and we are very lucky to have one. The frog was part of the deities of the people at the time. It's used as a pendant. You can see the hole in the middle of the back to run a string through and carry him around your neck as a offering to the frog god of the time. What we have in front of us here is a large fragment of a communal bowl. We can see on the inside of it here the remains of the food that was prepared in it. We have an entire side of it from the bottom to the rim, and you can see the charring on the inside and the little decorations on the edges. We're looking at the outside of this large cooking pot. If you look carefully, you can see the coils that were used to build it up. You can see the burning at the bottom of the thing when it was put on the open fire after it was made. But this was a large bowl, probably 15, 18 inches across, so it would hold a lot of food for a whole family for a night. These people were superb potters. They did not have a wheel. They had to build all this up by hand. This piece is one of two very similar pieces that were found on the site, and they demonstrate the trade networks of the people here 1,600 years ago. These pieces are very rare in the Caribbean. There's only been several dozen of them found, but they're scattered all over the Caribbean. We don't know where they're made, because their patterning is not what the people here did in most of their work, but are ones that are found throughout the Caribbean once in a long while. The example being here, out of the probably 10,000 pieces of pottery, we have found 2 of these. They are found in places like Pearls on Grenada, down in Trinidad, down in Puerto Rico, in that quantity. Very, very rare. And they all look very similar, and they are a demonstration of the trading patterns that were taking place here in the Caribbean 1,600 years ago. This piece is known as a white on red piece of pottery. It's made by making a very nice piece of pottery out of the local clays, and then you take local minerals and you coat it with a red slip coating. And then you let that dry, and you then create a white material that you can paint or rub onto the pottery. And as you notice, there are patterns in the white, done with fingertips or sticks. This is the traditional pottery of the Saladoid people. We find it in Puerto Rico and down island. It is a marker of these people. This nice little piece of yellow-orange rim is again a classic Saladoid artwork. Notice that it's got little triangular areas that are completely cross-hatched internally. The zone incising that they did so well. And it's on the lip of a piece of pottery, a bowl that was probably 10, 12 inches across. It's got a nice little decoration on the rim. 2 little nubbins with possible eyes in it, and there was probably, where the broken pottery is at the rim, a little upstanding piece that may have had some sort of decoration on it to distinguish this bowl as to whether it was a ceremonial bowl or just a common use bowl. This piece, when it was found, helped us really identify this as a Saladoid site. The pottery is very nice, very thin, extraordinarily smooth. It's only less than 5 millimeters thick, and it's just so finely made. And then you look at this little lip that's on the outside edge of the bowl at the top, and you see the red paint on it. This was made again from local clay, and the red paint is a local mineral. There are a number of them that can be made into red slips, and you can grind these up, possibly on a piece of coral, add it to water, get it to the thickness of maybe yogurt, a little thicker or maybe a little thinner, depending on the skill of the craftsperson. And they very often were women. Then you place it on here and just brush it on with whatever you've got, maybe a leaf or just your finger, and you get this lovely red edge. And then you finally fire it in basically the cooking fire that you're using. There's no specialized kilns here. You build a fire and you close it in, and you put the pottery in there, and you leave it in there until you decide it's burned out and as hot as it can get, and then you take it all out and you have a beautiful bowl like this. Little handles on it. Could be a religious bowl or it could be just a fancy bowl for one of the leaders, the Caciques of the local area. Here we have the end of what, if it was made today, would be called a little nut bowl. It's a small vessel, oval in shape, about 6-8 inches long and 4 or 5 inches wide, very shallow. And it was used on a table or as an offering piece. This one is very well decorated, both with little characters at the apex of the curves, but it's also marked along the rim and internally. The rim is also painted dark red. So these people had multiple ways of making paint and enjoyed the different colors. They're using this sort of stuff. In many ways, their environment is very generous to them, and they know how to extract what they need from it. But this is a beautiful little decorated piece of a small bowl, probably holding something of importance because it's small enough that they don't have a lot of it. Here we have one of the incredible carved sort of faces that come out of the Saladoid people. This one has 2 large eyes with black paint around them and red paint on them, and then a set of lips underneath it protruding, sort of as though they're waiting for it to be fed. And it's very interesting because the lips are not centered under the eyes. They're centered as though it should be 3 eyes on this thing. Quite possibly a symbolic representation of some religious event, but since these people left us no writing, we don't know what this really means. But it is an incredibly crafted piece, again, very finely made pottery, and then very well artistically decorated. Here we have the back side of that face, and when we look at this, we realize that that artist wasn't using a lump of clay to carve. That artist was sitting there, taking a pot, and very carefully forming it into the 3-dimensional face that was going to be built on the outside of it. Here is a handle for a basket-type ceramic bowl. Again, an extraordinarily rare piece. Only 2 or 3 of these have been found in the entire Caribbean. This is made out of local St. Thomas clay, and we have about 2/3 of it. The fun part being the little humanoid face. You can see a nose, a couple of eyes, some eyebrows, maybe cheeks, and some lips and a chin. That would have formed the handle attachment to the rim of the bowl. And the nubbin is up near the top, sort of to help you hold the thing. But locally made, with a Pan-Caribbean design to it, and extraordinarily rare. Just does not occur very often, but does occur once in a long while. Here we have a red Carnelian Bead. This is a rock crystal. The nearest source of this to St. Thomas is Montserrat. And so we are looking at the massive trading between these islands for luxury goods. This little bead probably took quite a bit of time to make because it really is drilled all the way through to be strung around somebody's neck, around somebody's arm. Lots of work went into it. It would be interesting to know what it was traded for. This red carnelian bead is here as part of the inter-island trade 1600 years ago. Here we have a face, anthropomorphic face, that's been made as a handle on a bowl. This is interestingly common also at the Tutu site. This is unique to St. Thomas in this particular form, just a nice round handle that looks sort of like a face in a very artistic fashion. And when we turn it over, we will see that it is absolutely hollow. This is another case of a superb potter who can work with very thin pots, very thin pieces of clay, and turn them into complex 3-dimensional objects that are spectacular on many, many levels. This is another face on a handle of a bowl. What is really interesting about this little face is if you look at the cheek, there are 2 little holes, one on each side. And we don't know quite what these are for. They're actually all the way through, and you could put string through them to hang this bowl, possibly. Couldn't put much weight in it, but it could be hung. Very much the human face. You know, you see the eyebrows, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and then the cheeks with their lovely little dimples that become string holes. Again, it's made on a hollow piece of clay. The artist sat there and took sheets of clay and made them into a little round thing and then put another piece of clay on it with all the details on it. Showing superb craftsmanship here in St. Thomas with St. Thomas clays some 1600 years ago.
Completion's Goddess is going to help us make the connections between the early settlements in other parts of the Caribbean. Just close by, St. John, St. Croix, we can now begin to make those connections. Completion's Goddess site also is an important site to us as Americans, because it makes the connection to our native populations, not only here in the Virgin Islands, but also on the US mainland. The Tainos, like other native settlers, traveled through South America, up to the Caribbean chain, and eventually on to the US mainland. There was also intertravel through the greater Caribbean area. And when we begin to study those other regions, we're going to learn the connections that we have right here in the Virgin Islands. The Completion's Goddess site reminds us that there's always history under our feet. As you walk through the town of Charlotte Amalie, or Cruz Bay, or Christiansted, or Frederiksted, remember that the history doesn't just stop at the road surface, that there's a lot of history several feet below where you stand. I also like to encourage you to visit our historical sites here in the Virgin Islands and learn more about the importance of these sites, not only to us as Virgin Islanders, but Americans, and our greater connection to the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, and South America.